They were not just warriors. They were living embodiments of primal fury, a walking storm of flesh and steel. They were called berserkers. The word itself, born in the cold fjords, comes from the Old Norse bear, meaning bear, and surkur, meaning shirt. Warriors in bear skins were those who became bears themselves in battle. On the battlefield, they were a nightmare. Before the fight, a berserker would enter a trance, a sacred madness known as berserkergang. He would howl like a wild beast, bite the edge of his shield, casting off armor to remain in a mere shirt, exposing his body to the blows of enemy swords. His eyes, they burned with an otherworldly fire. This fury made them almost invincible. Pain receded, and their strength multiplied tenfold. They would burst into enemy ranks, sowing panic with their mere appearance. Chronicles tell of how a single berserker could hold back an entire squad, his roar drowning out the clash of steel, his body seemingly impervious to wounds. It was a weapon, psychological and physical. How did they achieve such a state? Scholars still clash over this. Some suggest the warriors used psychoactive substances, perhaps a decoction of fly agaric mushrooms or henbane. Imagine the ritual, the smoke of a bonfire, monotonous chanting, a bowl with an intoxicating drink passed around until the world began to blur before their eyes. But this power had a dark side. Uncontrollable rage sometimes turned against their own people. After the battle, as the adrenaline subsided, a berserker could attack his comrades, unable to distinguish friend from foe. This unpredictability was terrifying. Over time, with the advent of Christianity, their pagan savagery and bloody rituals became incompatible with the New World Order, and berserkers were outlawed. Chapter 2. The image of a Viking covered in tattoos from fingers to neck has become iconic. But what do we know for sure? Direct evidence, alas, is lacking. Time is merciless to human skin, but eyewitness accounts have survived. And the most vivid comes from the 10th century Arab traveler, Ahmad ibn Fadlan. He met the Rus on the banks of the Volga and was astonished. In his writings, he described them as tall, powerful men whose bodies were covered in complex patterns. From the tips of their nails to their very necks, their skin was etched with images of trees, serpents, and enigmatic symbols, dark green and blue, as if engraved by nature itself. The process itself was excruciating. Imagine a tattooist's workshop, the smell of soot and herbs mixed to create ink. The tools, sharp needles made of bone or metal. Each prick of the needle was pain, a test of will. But for a Viking, a tattoo was not just decoration, but a part of his essence, his history carved into his flesh. These patterns were a language of symbols. Serpents and dragons, like Jormungandr encircling the world, symbolized power and chaos. Runes granted the protection of the gods, and images of mythical beasts bestowed their fury and might. A tattoo could tell of a warrior's deeds, his status in his clan, or a sacred oath sworn to the gods. Chapter 3. Perhaps the most disturbing and taboo subject is cannibalism. The thought that Vikings might have eaten their own kind is blood-chilling. It was not a widespread practice, but historical records and archaeological findings hint that in certain extreme circumstances it happened. The Norse sagas, where myth intertwines with reality, mention acts of cannibalism. Sometimes it is described as a grim ritual, a way to absorb the strength and courage of a fallen enemy. A warrior who ate the heart of a valiant foe believed that his valor would be transferred to him. It was the ultimate act of domination and desecration. Archaeology provides sparse but compelling clues. At some Viking sites, particularly in the British Isles, human bones have been found with cut marks. The nature of these marks suggests that flesh was stripped from the bones, consistent with butchery techniques. The scholarly debate rages on. Was it ritual or simple starvation? Imagine a long, merciless winter in a besieged fortress. Supplies have run out. All around is only snow and enemies. Inside the walls, despair and a hunger that drives one mad. In such moments, the lines between man and beast blur. Perhaps it was hunger, not ritual, that pushed people to this final, horrifying step. Chapter 4. The religion of the Norse was soaked in blood. Human sacrifice was not just a barbaric custom, but a cornerstone of their faith, a way to communicate with the gods. The ritual, known as blot, was performed to gain the favor of the Aesir. And though animals were more often sacrificed, in the most crucial moments, the gods demanded human blood. The most detailed account comes from Adam of Bremen, a German chronicler of the 11th century. He wrote of the great temple at Uppsala, in Sweden. Every 9 years, a grand festival was held there. 9 male creatures of every species, including humans, were sacrificed. Their bodies, they were hung from the trees in a sacred grove near the temple. Imagine this grove. Grim, ancient trees, from whose branches hang the bodies of men and animals. The smell of decay mixes with the scent of incense. Priests in ritual garments chant prayers, while the crowd watches with reverent horror. This was the price of prosperity, the payment for a good harvest and victory in battle. The Vikings believed that the world was held in a fragile balance between the divine and the mortal. Blood was the force that nourished the gods and maintained this balance. A sacrifice was not murder in our understanding. It was a gift, a sacred exchange, where a mortal life was given in return for the well-being of the entire tribe. Chapter 5. Viking society was rigidly structured. At the very bottom were the slaves, the thralls. Their lives were worthless, yet even in death, they played their terrible role. And again, Ahmad ibn Fadlan left us a chilling account of the funeral ritual for a noble Rus chieftain. When a chieftain died, his body was prepared for its final journey. He was placed on a ship that would serve as his funeral pyre. Along with him, they carried his weapons, treasures, beloved horses, and dogs. But the most horrific element of the ritual was the sacrifice of a slave girl who was to follow her master into the afterlife. Ibn Fadlan describes in detail how a, quote, volunteer girl was chosen from among the slaves. She was given intoxicating drinks, she sang songs, seemingly joyful about her fate. But this was an illusion of choice. She was led to a special tent where the men of the chieftain's retinue ritually possessed her, symbolically uniting her with the deceased. The culmination was the act of killing itself. The girl was brought to the ship. 2 men pulled a rope around her neck, while an elderly woman, called the Angel of Death, plunged a ritual dagger into her heart. Her body was laid next to the chieftain's. Then the ship was set ablaze, and the black smoke carried their souls to Valhalla. Chapter 6. And so we come to the darkest, most controversial ritual, the blood eagle. The name alone sends a shiver down the spine. This method of execution, described in the sagas, was reserved for the most hated enemies. It was not just death, but a monstrous spectacle of pain and humiliation, designed to instill terror in the hearts of all who witnessed it. The ritual was the embodiment of cruelty. The victim was forced to his knees, his back sliced open with a sharp knife along the spine. The executioner would then thrust his hands into the wound, break the ribs from the spinal column, and pull them outward, creating the semblance of bloody wings. And this happened while the person was still alive. The final chord of this nightmare was the removal of the lungs. They were pulled out through the wound in the back and laid upon the averted ribs. The pulsating, breathing flesh on the wings was meant to symbolize the final flaps of an eagle. Death came from shock and asphyxiation. It was revenge, absolute, total, unforgettable. The Vikings were a people of stark contrasts, fierce warriors and skilled navigators, poets and brutal killers. Their world was woven from glory and horror, from loyalty and betrayal. By studying their dark traditions, we do not condone them, but we try to understand. To understand a world where life was short and the gods demanded blood.